The gate was taller than I remembered. Black iron, polished so clean it reflected the late afternoon sun like a warning. I stood there, keys heavy in my palm, listening to the quiet hum of a life I had built without permission from anyone who once owned me. Somewhere behind me, the house settled with a soft creak, old wood breathing, gardens whispering, a child's laugh drifting through an open window. The sound landed in my chest and stayed there, warm and steady. That was when my phone vibrated. Security, calm, professional. There's an older couple at the gate. They say they're your parents. For a moment, the world narrowed to the weight of those words. The past pressed forward like a tide, cold and inevitable. The iron gate in front of me blurred, and another door appeared instead. The front door of my childhood home, wood darkened by years of use, the smell of dinner hanging in the air, mashed potatoes, butter melting, the scrape of a chair. 9 years earlier, my father had looked at me like I was a defect he'd finally identified. Not a mistake in judgment, a mistake in existence. You have 1 hour. The memory didn't come with sound first. It came with sensation. The way my fingers went numb. The way my throat tightened so hard swallowing felt like glass. The way the room felt suddenly too small, as if the walls themselves were embarrassed to be associated with me. I was 21 then, pregnant, sitting at the dinner table where I had done homework, celebrated birthdays, learned how to keep my shoulders squared and my voice steady. My father's disappointment had always been a presence, quiet, constant, like background radiation. He wanted a son. He got me, and he spent years sanding me down into something that almost fit the outline of his expectations. While other girls learned softness, I learned efficiency. How to lift without bending wrong. How to keep up with men twice my size on job sites in the summer heat. How to earn praise that never quite arrived. I learned early that approval was conditional, fragile, and never to be trusted. Straight A's were expected. Ambition was mandatory. Emotion was a liability. My mother existed in the negative space of the house, always there, never present. She mastered the art of quiet survival, no waves, no disruptions, no defiance. Comfort wrapped around her like a blanket she refused to drop, even when it meant letting her only daughter shiver. That night, when I told them I was pregnant, the table might as well have cracked in half. My father's face changed in stages, like a building under controlled demolition. The disappointment sharpened, hardened. Then came something else, cold, precise, and final. He talked about reputation, about plans, about how much time he had invested trying to make me useful. Then the chair went over. The sound still lives in my bones. He called me a stupid mistake, not a bad decision, not a setback, a mistake, something to be corrected by removal. He gave me 1 hour to pack 21 years into whatever my arms could carry. He didn't look back as he said it. He didn't need to. I looked at my mother. She studied her plate like it held answers she could read if she stared long enough. Her silence was not confusion. It was choice. I packed with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 2 suitcases, clothes folded wrong, important papers forgotten, then remembered, then forgotten again. Downstairs, the television came on. Laughter, applause. A game show jingle bright enough to mock me as I erased myself from that house. Outside, the air was sharp. Night had fallen without asking if I was ready. I sat in my car and called the man who had promised me a future. The screen lit my face blue, then went dark, then lit again. Hours passed like that, hope thinning with every minute. When the message finally arrived, it was short enough to fit inside a breath. 6 words that ended everything I thought I was allowed to want. The phone felt heavier after that, like it carried the weight of every lie I had believed. By morning, I was homeless, disowned, alone, pregnant with a future that terrified me and a past that had already decided I was disposable. I didn't know then that this was the beginning. I didn't know I would learn how to survive on numbers so small they felt insulting. That my body would ache in ways exhaustion can't explain. That I would discover how quiet rage sounds at 3 in the morning when a city never quite sleeps and your child isn't born yet but already owns your heart. I only knew that something had been taken from me that night, and something else, harder, sharper, had settled in its place. At the gate, 9 years later, the iron bars were still closed. Security waited for my answer. I looked once more toward the house, toward the life humming behind me, and felt a calm I didn't recognize at first. Then I spoke. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." And I let them wait. Waiting is a strange thing when power has finally shifted. For 9 years, waiting had meant hunger, fear, unanswered calls, and doors that never opened. Now, waiting meant choice. It meant control. As I walked back toward the house, each step felt deliberate, grounded, earned. The gravel beneath my shoes crunched softly, a sound so ordinary it almost felt ceremonial. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and fresh coffee. Sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors in long, confident lines. From the garden, Iris's laughter lifted and fell, light as wind through leaves. That sound anchored me. It reminded me why I was standing here, why the past had no right to rush me. But the past had never been patient. After the night my father erased me, the humiliation didn't end at the front door. It followed me. It multiplied. It learned my name. The first place I slept wasn't a bed. It was my car, parked under a flickering streetlight in a grocery store lot. The seat wouldn't recline all the way, and every time a car passed, my body tensed, bracing for a knock on the window, for someone to tell me I didn't belong there either. Morning came with stiffness and the taste of panic. I washed my face in a gas station bathroom, stared at my reflection under harsh fluorescent lights, and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked smaller somehow, folded inward. Money disappeared faster than dignity. Savings meant nothing when rent wanted proof you didn't have. I learned quickly how people look at you when you're visibly desperate, how their eyes slide past your face, how conversations end early, how "we'll call you" really means "don't come back." I called relatives. The line went quiet after my name. My father had been efficient, he always was. He told his version first, wrapped in concern and implication. Troubled, unstable, making bad choices. No one asked me what had happened. They had already decided. The boarding house in Newark took cash and didn't ask questions. The carpet smelled like old water and resignation. The walls were thin enough to hear other people's lives unraveling at night. Coughs, arguments, crying that stopped abruptly when someone remembered how close everyone else was. My room had one window that looked onto a brick wall, close enough to touch if I leaned out. It felt appropriate. I worked until my body forgot what rest was. Mornings started before the sun. Flour caked under my nails at the bakery, my feet numb on cold tile. Afternoons pressing shirts that weren't mine, smoothing out other people's creases while my own life wrinkled beyond repair. Nights at a call center where strangers yelled at me for things I didn't control, their anger bleeding through cheap headsets straight into my skull. Pregnancy added a new layer of cruelty. My body changed faster than my circumstances. Morning sickness didn't care about schedules. Exhaustion didn't respect shifts. I learned how to throw up quietly in public bathrooms and still make it back to my station on time. I learned how to smile with my eyes because my mouth was too tired to cooperate. The humiliation peaked in small moments. The cashier who double-checked my food stamps like I might be committing a crime. The nurse who asked where the father was and nodded too slowly at my answer. The landlord who reminded me, twice, that late rent meant eviction, pregnancy or not. And through it all, silence from the two people who had made me. I wrote to my mother once before Iris was born. The letter was careful, almost gentle, like I was afraid of startling her. I told her I was okay even when I was. I told her I forgave her even though I didn't understand what forgiveness was supposed to feel like. I asked nothing except acknowledgement, some sign that I still existed to her. Weeks passed. Then an envelope arrived with her handwriting, familiar and distant all at once. One paragraph. Apology diluted until it was barely visible. A sentence about how my father believed it was best to move on. The words sat on the page like a closed door. I folded the letter and put it away. Some wounds deepen when you touch them. When my body finally gave out at 6 months, it did so without drama. One moment I was standing, the next the floor was rushing up. White lights, voices, a doctor's expression tight with concern that carried judgment just beneath it. He told me I was pushing too hard, that my baby was paying the price. His tone assumed recklessness, not survival. I quit 2 jobs that day, not because I wanted to, because my body forced the decision. That winter was thin and sharp. I learned the weight of coins, the exact cost of milk versus diapers. I learned how long a week feels when you measure it in meals. Anxiety lived under my skin, buzzing constantly, a low electrical hum that never shut off. Then Iris arrived. The delivery room was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like the universe was holding its breath. No flowers, no pacing father, no proud grandparents in the hallway. Just me, exhausted to the bone, staring at a tiny face that scrunched and relaxed and owned me completely in an instant. The nurse asked if my family was coming. I said they were traveling. The lie slid out easily. Practice had made it smooth. Holding my daughter, I felt something settle that had been missing my entire life. Not approval, not permission, purpose. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fatigue and fear, a realization began to form. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. They had taken everything from me. Which meant, one day, I would decide what they got back. The nights were the worst. Daytime had structure. Even suffering followed a schedule. Feed Iris. Work. Count money. Repeat. But at night, when the city noise softened and the boarding house settled into its uneasy silence, my thoughts grew teeth. Sleep came in fragments. 20 minutes here. 40 there. My body would jolt awake for no reason, heart racing, palms damp, as if something terrible had just happened, even when nothing had. Sometimes I'd sit up in the dark, listening to Iris breathe in her crib, counting each rise and fall of her tiny chest until my own lungs remembered how to work. That was when my father's voice came back. Not as a memory, as a presence. It sounded exactly the way it had at the dinner table. Flat, controlled, lethal. It replayed itself while I stared at the ceiling, while I washed bottles, while I stood in line at the grocery store calculating whether I could afford both eggs and fruit. A stupid mistake. The words didn't yell. They didn't need to. They slipped into everything. When I doubted myself, when I hesitated, when exhaustion made my hands shake. They explained every struggle, every closed door, every look of pity. A neat little narrative that made suffering feel deserved. My mother's silence followed right behind it. That was the part that hollowed me out. Not rage, absence. The image of her at the table, fork paused, eyes locked on mashed potatoes like they were more important than her child. Silence has weight when it's chosen. It presses down slowly until you forget what it feels like to stand upright. I stopped expecting help. From anyone. Expectation felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I learned to do everything alone, appointments, paperwork, childcare logistics that felt like solving puzzles while blindfolded. Pride wasn't involved. Pride requires options. This was survival stripped to its bones. I started losing time. Not in a dramatic way, just moments slipping through my fingers. I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, bottle warmer humming, unable to remember why I'd walked in there. I'd reread the same page of a book 5 times without absorbing a word. The world felt slightly out of focus, like I was watching my own life through thick glass. The breaking point didn't come as an explosion. It came as a sound. Iris was almost a year old, teething, fussy, crying in a way that cut straight through my nerves. I had been awake for nearly 30 hours between work and her fever. My head throbbed, my vision narrowed. The crying didn't stop, it just drilled deeper. I stood there, holding her, rocking back and forth, and for the first time a thought crossed my mind that terrified me. Not harm, never that. Escape. Just disappearing, just not being here for a moment. The idea flashed through me like static. Fast, ugly, gone as quickly as it arrived. But it left something behind, a cold understanding of how close I was to the edge. I set Iris down in her crib. I stepped into the bathroom. I locked the door, and I slid down the wall until the floor caught me. My body shook without permission, silent, violent. My hands pressed against my mouth to keep any sound from escaping. I tasted metal. Tears blurred everything. My chest burned like I'd been running, but I hadn't moved. That was the moment. Not the pregnancy, not being thrown out, not Tyler's 6 words, not the hospital floor. This. The realization that if I didn't change something, anything, I was going to disappear from the inside out. I stayed on that bathroom floor until my breathing slowed, until my hands stopped trembling. Then I stood up, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. I didn't see a mistake. I saw a woman who was still standing after everything designed to flatten her. I saw someone who had learned discipline from a man who never loved her and endurance from a woman who never defended her. I saw skills I had never acknowledged because no one had ever praised them without conditions. And something else surfaced, quiet but undeniable. Anger. Not the explosive kind, not the kind that breaks things. This was colder, cleaner, focused. It didn't want to scream, it wanted to asterisk build. That night, after Iris fell asleep again, I didn't lie down. I sat at the small table in my room with a notebook and a pen. No affirmations, no fantasies, just facts. What I knew. What I could do. What I refused to accept anymore. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote about never asking for permission again, about never being powerless again, about never allowing someone else's disappointment to define my worth. Revenge didn't appear as a plan. It appeared as a decision. A decision to become untouchable. Not rich yet, not successful yet, but inevitable. I closed the notebook and placed it under Iris's crib like a foundation stone. A quiet promise to myself that this exhaustion, this humiliation, this shrinking life was temporary. I didn't know how long it would take. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was done breaking. From this point forward, everything I did would be deliberate. And somewhere far away, without knowing it yet, the people who had discarded me were already standing on ground that was about to give way. Planning didn't feel heroic. There were no dramatic montages, no sudden transformations, no moment where everything snapped into focus and became easy. Planning felt like restraint, like swallowing words that wanted out, like choosing the long road every single time when the short one whispered your name. The notebook under Iris's crib became my anchor. I didn't open it every day. I didn't need to. Just knowing it was there reminded me that I had made a decision, and decisions, real ones, don't require constant rehearsal. I started small, painfully small. The first rule I gave myself was silence, not the kind my mother practiced, the cowardly kind that avoids conflict but strategic silence. I stopped explaining myself to coworkers, to landlords, to strangers who asked questions they weren't entitled to. I answered only what was required and kept the rest of my life sealed tight. People underestimate quiet women. I learned to let them. The job at Miriam Castellanos' property management firm didn't look like opportunity at first. Filing, phones, coffee runs, the kind of work people stop seeing after the first week. But I noticed everything. I noticed how contracts were written to protect one side more than the other. I noticed which tenants paid on time and which excuses repeated themselves. I noticed which properties bled money quietly and which ones could be salvaged with the right attention. Most importantly, I noticed Miriam. She watched people the way hawks watch fields, not impatient, not rushed, just waiting for movement that mattered. When she corrected me, it was sharp and precise. No sugar, no apology. When she trusted me with more responsibility, she didn't announce it. She just did it and waited to see if I would rise or crumble. I rose. At night, after Iris slept, I studied, not out of inspiration, out of stubbornness. Textbooks spread across the table, highlighters drying out faster than my energy, numbers that blurred until they made sense. I learned the language of leverage, of timing, of risk disguised as caution. Fear didn't disappear. It sat with me like an unwelcome roommate. Every step forward triggered my father's voice again, reminding me what happened the last time I reached too high. The difference now was that I didn't argue with it. I acknowledged it. Then I kept going anyway. That was the hardest part, moving forward without reassurance, without applause, without anyone telling me I was doing the right thing. Every achievement happened quietly. Passing exams, catching mistakes others missed, being trusted with tasks that carried consequences. No one from my old life knew any of this. That was intentional. I didn't update social media. I didn't announce milestones. I didn't reconnect. Success, I learned, grows better in the dark. Less interference, fewer expectations, fewer people waiting to see you fail. Money became a tool, not a dream. Every dollar had an assignment. Savings weren't comfort, they were insulation. Protection against being cornered again. I tracked everything with obsessive care. Control soothed me in a way sleep no longer did. Iris grew while I built. Her first words, her first steps, the way her hand fit into mine like it had always belonged there. She didn't know we were poor. She knew routine, safety, love. Those things mattered more than square footage. One night when she asked why we didn't have a backyard, I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not sadness, determination. I didn't promise her happiness. I promised her space. Something tangible, something real. From that moment on, every plan had a direction. Still, I didn't act. That was the discipline. I watched opportunities pass because the timing wasn't right. I swallowed impatience. I said no to things that would have fed my ego but starved my future. Planning is choosing discomfort now so you don't bleed later. Through it all, I kept one rule sacred. I never thought about my parents. Not actively, not emotionally. I didn't fantasize about confrontations or apologies. I didn't imagine them watching me succeed. That kind of thinking still gave them space in my head, and space was valuable real estate. If their lives were collapsing, and I suspected they were, that was background noise. My focus stayed narrow, forward. By the time I was ready to move, years had passed. I had skills, credibility, a reputation that spoke quietly but clearly. I had leverage I hadn't needed to use yet, and most importantly, I had patience. Patience sharpens revenge without ever calling it that. I didn't know when the moment would come. I didn't need to. I only knew that when it did, I would be ready, steady, composed, and unrecognizable to the girl who once packed her life into 2 shaking suitcases. Some people prepare to strike. I prepared to stand. And when the time came, standing would be enough to make everything else collapse on its own. Revenge rarely announces itself. It doesn't knock. It doesn't warn. It arrives quietly, disguised as coincidence, timing, inevitability. By the time my parents realized what was happening, the outcome had already been decided. Their decline wasn't sudden. It was slow, humiliating, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. And I was paying attention, not obsessively, not emotionally, but professionally. Public records, industry chatter, the kinds of facts no one can argue with once they're written down. Hall construction was drowning. Bad loans, overextended credit, contracts lost to younger firms with sharper instincts and less pride. My father had built his company the way he built his family, rigid, authoritarian, unwilling to adapt. That approach works until it doesn't, and when it fails publicly. I never caused his downfall. That's important. I didn't sabotage. I didn't interfere. I didn't touch his business at all. I simply positioned myself so that when gravity did its work, I would be standing exactly where I needed to be. Thornfield Estate was the final piece. 6 bedrooms, historic bones, 4 acres of land in Ridgewood, 3 miles from the house I had been thrown out of with 2 suitcases and nowhere to go. The listing had been sitting for years. Too expensive, too much work, too intimidating for buyers who wanted perfection without effort. I saw it instantly. The location wasn't the point. The land wasn't the point. The investment return was solid, but that wasn't the poetry of it. The poetry was this: I would return not as the girl who begged to be kept, but as the woman who needed nothing. Signing those papers felt anticlimactic. No thunder, no shaking hands, just ink drying on paper and a calm certainty settling into place. Practical, precise, permanent. When we moved in, I kept everything understated. No announcements, no parties, no press. Ridgewood talks without encouragement. It didn't take long. Whispers reached the right ears faster than I expected. My parents heard through others, not me. That mattered. It meant the truth arrived stripped of my voice, raw and undeniable. The daughter they erased was back, living in one of the most expensive properties in town. Successful, self-made, unreachable. My mother heard first. Her social circle collapsed around her in polite curiosity and poorly disguised shock. She went pale, excused herself early, carried the news home like a verdict. My father didn't believe it. He researched obsessively. Late nights, financial filings, company records, photographs from conferences. My name tied to projects worth more than his entire remaining portfolio. Proof layered on proof until denial wasn't possible anymore. That's when desperation took over. The call to my gate wasn't planned courage. It was panic. I let them wait 47 minutes. Not because I needed the time. Because waiting teaches humility faster than lectures ever could. When I walked down to the gate, I didn't rush. I didn't brace. I didn't prepare speeches in my head. I simply arrived as I was, composed, dressed for my day, keys in hand, the house behind me solid and real. My father tried warmth first. It didn't fit him. His smile trembled at the edges. His words came out too practiced, stacked on top of each other without room to breathe. Family, misunderstanding, pride, reconciliation. He spoke like a man selling something he no longer owned. My mother stayed quiet. Her eyes moved constantly, from the iron gate to the driveway, to the gardens, to the house, taking inventory of everything she hadn't been part of. I didn't interrupt. Silence is a mirror. People reveal themselves if you let them keep talking. Eventually, the truth surfaced. The company was bankrupt. The house was next. They needed help. Not asterisk me asterisk. My resources. That was the moment everything aligned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I didn't step back. I stood exactly where I was and let the distance speak for itself. I reminded my father of his words. Calmly, precisely. I repeated them the way you read facts from a report. No inflection, no accusation, just record. I reminded my mother of her letter, of sorry, of choosing comfort while I chose survival. My father shifted strategies. Anger, guilt, remorse, each deployed in order, each less convincing than the last. His authority dissolved with every attempt. He wasn't intimidating anymore. He was just loud. When he finally asked, really asked for help, The irony sat between us like a third person. I said no. Not cruelly, not triumphantly. Simply no. I told him the truth he had never given me. I didn't owe him anything. The relationship ended the night he put a timer on my existence. Accounts settled. Balance zero. My mother asked to see my daughter. That request landed differently. Softer, more dangerous. For a moment, I considered the weight of blood and history. Then I remembered the years she had chosen silence. The letter. The comfort she protected at my expense. I protected my child instead. They left slowly. Not because I asked them to hurry. Because there was nothing left to say. As their car disappeared down the road, something inside me released. Not with relief, not with victory, but with finality. Like closing a door you no longer need to check. That was the revenge. No destruction, no humiliation staged by me. Just reality, undeniable and complete, standing taller than their regret. After they left, the quiet felt different. Not heavy, not sharp, clean. I stood at the gate longer than necessary, watching the empty road where their car had disappeared. There was no urge to follow, no impulse to replay the conversation, no delayed rush of adrenaline demanding expression. The moment had ended exactly where it was supposed to. Complete, contained. Behind me, life continued without pause. The sound of children laughing carried over the lawn. Iris's voice rose above the rest, bright, confident, unburdened. That sound mattered more than anything that had just happened. It grounded me in the present, where my power actually lived. When she ran up to me, cheeks flushed, hair tangled from play, she asked who the people were. I looked at her, really looked. This child who had never been measured against someone else's expectations, who had never been told her existence was inconvenient, who took up space without apology because she had been taught that space was hers by default. "They're not important," I said. And the truth of that statement settled in me like a final breath after a long dive. That night, we ate dinner in the garden. Food prepared by someone else, served without counting portions, enjoyed without urgency. The children moved in and out of the light as the sun went down, inventing games that required no instructions. Russell sat across from me, calm and steady as he always was, the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but anchors everything around it. I watched him with the kids, the patience, the consistency, the way he listened before speaking. Years ago, I would have been suspicious of that kind of quiet. I would have searched for the catch. Now I recognized it for what it was: earned trust, built slowly, brick by brick. Later, after the house settled and the night wrapped around us, I stood in my office and looked out over the land. Acres of promise, trees shifting gently in the dark, a future that felt expansive instead of claustrophobic. I thought about revenge then, not the act but the idea. It hadn't felt like revenge while it was happening. There was no rush, no satisfaction spike, no desire to celebrate. What I felt was alignment, like everything had finally landed where it belonged. My parents didn't leave punished. They left irrelevant. And that distinction mattered. For years, I had carried the weight of their judgment like it was a debt I would always owe. Every achievement felt provisional, like it needed their approval to become real. Standing there, in a life built entirely by my own hands, I understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Worth isn't something you recover from the people who withheld it. You generate it. The girl who packed her life into 2 suitcases had survived because she had no choice. The woman standing here had built because she chose to. Survival kept me alive. Choice gave me freedom. I didn't forgive my parents in a dramatic, cinematic way. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't required for peace. What I released was the expectation that they would ever become who I needed them to be. That expectation had been the last chain. Without it, there was nothing left to resolve. I went into my closet and paused in front of the framed work pants, polyester, worn thin at the knees, permanently creased from long shifts and longer nights. They hung there not as a reminder of suffering, but of capability. Proof that I could endure, proof that I could adapt, proof that I could build from nothing. I didn't keep them to remember pain. I kept them to remember strength. Before bed, Iris showed me a new drawing. Our house, exaggerated and tall. The backyard stretching wide. 3 figures holding hands and a 4th standing just close enough to belong. No empty spaces, no erased faces. I tucked her in and kissed her forehead. She slept without fear, without waiting for approval, without wondering if she would be chosen. That was the real victory. Not the house, not the business, not the moment at the gate. The ending of a cycle. Some people throw their children away and spend the rest of their lives trying to recover what they lost. Others take what they were given, pain, silence, rejection, and build something so solid that it never needs to be defended. I built a life that didn't require permission. I built a family by choice. And the people who once called me a mistake became nothing more than a chapter I no longer needed to reread. Thank you for listening. More stories are waiting for you, stories about resilience, quiet power, and what happens when someone refuses to stay broken. Click 1 now. I'll see you there.